Alright guys, welcome to Real Classic Film Reviews and welcome to the Greatest Movie Years series where we cast the spotlight on a specific year in movie history, and in this episode we're looking all the way back to 1939, another year that's widely considered to be right up there in terms of the sheer quality on offer. It was the height of the golden age of Hollywood. Now this of course would be one of the most pivotal years in world history. On the 1st of September 1939, under Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. A couple of days later the UK would declare war against Nazi Germany and World War II would begin. Now there's a few cinematic monoliths this year. Of course, Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz would arrive in spectacular Technicolor fashion, and we'll get to those in a moment or two. But I want to kickstart this look at 1939 off with John Ford, the legendary director who made almost 150 movies in 59 years. In this year alone he released Drums Along the Mohawk and Young Mr. Lincoln, both with Henry Fonda, and also Stagecoach with a young John Wayne. Now here is the Ringo Kid. This was probably John Wayne's breakout film role, which is funny because I think it's actually about his 80th movie, which is astonishing. But anyway, it's a pivotal entry in the Western genre. It was John Ford's first sound Western and, of course, became famous for the brilliant stunt work from stuntman Yakima Canute. Staying on the Western wagon for a moment longer, 1939 also brought us James Stewart and Marlene Dietrich in Destry Rides Again, which is a personal favourite of mine. Now I also want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to an actor named Gene Autry, who's sadly forgotten now but was one of the biggest stars of the late 30s, starring in just Western after Western for Republic Pictures. In 1939 he starred in no fewer than 8 movies. Granted they're a little bit of a cookie cutter by modern standards, but I'd recommend taking a look at 1939's Colorado Sunset and South of the Border. Right, let's take a huge jump from black and white B-movie westerns to the pinnacle of movie making in the late 30s with MGM's Technicolor triumph, the avatar of its day, The Wizard of Oz. Now probably in the conversation for one of the most famous movies ever made, and still the dictionary definition of family entertainment. Now it was by a mile the highest grossing film of that year, and one that truly catapulted Judy Garland into this stratosphere of Hollywood fame. It of course gave us the immortal song Over the Rainbow, a song incidentally that was almost cut from the movie to reduce the running time of that opening farmyard sequence. It was a gift and a curse to Garland, who spent the rest of her life unable to get off stage without singing it. Now there was also one of the Jewel in the Hollywood Crown released this year, but we'll get to that in a minute or two. So Frank Capra, the famous director of Christmas classic It's a Wonderful Life, had an awesome 30s with films such as It Happened One Night, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and this James Stewart, Jean Arthur team up, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Jefferson Smith is one of Stewart's great early roles, and one that really started to cement that image and idea that you have of James Stewart when you think of him, if that makes sense. So also in 1939, and not long after releasing his World War I masterpiece, Grand Illusion, Jean Renoir released maybe his masterwork in The Rules of the Game. Now for me, when I first watched this film when I was a lot younger, I didn't really appreciate it and its examination and unpopular attack on French society and the class divide between snotty aristocrats and its servants. If you've ever seen Robert Altman's 2001 film Gosford Park with its 30s setting and its hunting weekend storyline, then you'll see how its legacy lives on, even over here in the UK. In the early 70s, ITV show Upstairs Downstairs brilliantly highlighted the slow decline of British aristocracy. Now, speaking of Britain, let's stay in this neck of the woods, because 1939 was also the year that Basil Rathbone took on the mantle of Sherlock Holmes, with Nigel Bruce, of course, as Dr. Watson. Early in the year, audiences got to see The Hound of the Baskervilles, where Richard Greene as Sir Henry Baskerville was billed above Rathbone, the studio unsure about the popularity of the character. And there was, of course, no need to worry. The second Sherlock movie arrived about 6 months later, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and this pitted him against Moriarty in a classic crown jewels robbery tale. And this would be the second of the 14 Sherlock Holmes movies that Rathbone would star in, and the last one to be set in the late 1800s before the series initially took on the role of being essentially wartime propaganda. Now, released between these two Sherlock adventures, Ukrainian filmmaker Anatol Litvak released his spy thriller Confessions of a Nazi Spy, with Edward G. Robinson and George Sanders, the first anti-Nazi war film made in Hollywood. The movie caused all sorts of issues for Warner Brothers, with the studio having to ramp up security throughout filming and distribution, and Adolf Hitler himself apparently planning to execute the filmmakers. And one of my all-time personal favourite film directors made his final film in the United Kingdom before he moved to the United States. Alfred Hitchcock's Jamaica Inn, the Cornwall set tale of a gang of wreckers causing shipwrecks in order to steal their cargo. It's a decent little film, but not in the same class as some of the films that Hitch would craft once he got to the US and got his hands on some real studio money. This, I think, was Maureen O'Hara's first fully credited screen role also, and she's teamed up again this year with co-star Charles Lawton when he played Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So 1939 also featured Cary Grant, Jean Arthur and Rita Hayworth teaming up for Howard Hawks' Only Angels Have Wings, the tale of romance at a remote South American trading port. Love Affair with Irene Dunne and Charles Boyer was the tale of romance beginning aboard a ship and was later remade as An Affair to Remember in 1957 and again in 1994 as Love Affair. And we also got Dark Victory, which sounds like a war movie, but is actually romance in the face of terminal illness with Bette Davis and Humphrey Bogart. Crikey, I almost forgot about Raoul Walsh's The Roaring Twenties, that paired Bogart with James Cagney, two ex-soldiers trying to make it big in Prohibition Chicago. And this was one of Walsh's great movies in a career littered with them, and features one of the greatest final shots and final lines of dialogue in any movie. Definitely check this one out. Now, before we finish up, let's quickly mention Cary Grant's war comedy Gunga Din, also with Joan Fontaine, William Wyler's Wuthering Heights with Laurence Olivier and David Niven, and Ernst Lubitsch teaming up with Bela Lugosi and the great Greta Garbo for Ninotchka. But for Christmas in 1939, US audiences were swept up by Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh in Gone with the Wind. Incidentally, UK audiences would have to wait until June 1940 to see it. Adjusted for inflation, it's still the highest grossing film of all time, something like $4.1 billion in today's money. I feel like this and maybe Lawrence of Arabia and Ben-Hur are the films that come to mind when you talk about epic movies. This Civil War set tale of one of cinema's most turbulent romances is, like The Wizard of Oz, one of those movies that's so tightly woven into the history of Hollywood that they're almost immune to criticism. Now, the relatively recent witch hunt over the film's portrayal of its black characters is testament to the sad times that we live in and our misguided attempts to delete history. Let's not forget, Hattie McDaniel became the first African-American to be nominated for and win an Oscar here for her brilliant work as Mammy. But Gone with the Wind is also an apt title, really, for a film that they certainly don't make anymore. The days of 4-hour-long period romantic dramas being colossal cinematic events are sadly long gone.
Red, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Guys, thanks so much for watching this little look at the year 1939 in the greatest movie year series. As always, if you enjoyed this kind of thing, then a like really helps the channel out. And comment below if you have any thoughts on this year and the movies released. Until next time, happy viewing.
And think to yourself, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
There's no place like home.